Hello and welcome to another podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. If you're watching this on video, please note, this is not a podcast. This is a video where I talk about podcasting. If you want the podcast, go to podcastpontifications.com. Today we're going to talk about focus, continuing our series, ending our little 4-part mini-series on the topic of focus. And this topic is focus on business goals with your podcast. But before we do that, a little shout out. Thanks to everyone with the outpouring of support. That I did go see a doctor yesterday. I am feeling much better, as you can tell. Just a cold, and so he loaded me up on some things, and I'm fine. I'm wonderful. You can tell. Like, just go listen to yesterday's video. If you missed that, go back and listen to the show. Watch the video if you'd like. Wow, big difference today. All right. So thank you very much. Back to this. Focus on your business goals. No, change the wording. The wording is important here. Focus on business goals with your podcast. Notice I didn't say focus on your podcast's business goals, nor did I say focus on your podcast's goals, or even focus on your whatever. That's not the idea, and your is not the problem here. The problem is where podcasters put their focus when they're thinking about goals. Listen, it's very easy, podcaster, to track how many downloads your podcast gets. It's relatively straightforward to understand how many listens, what your listen rate is on those episodes that are downloaded. It's not even that hard to go in and really boost your podcast up the chain. Lots of topics we've had in the last 134 episodes about ways to boost your podcast, but we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about what the podcast should serve. And the podcast should serve your business goals. Unless, of course, your podcast is, for many podcasters, or some podcasters, some successful podcasters, their podcast is their business. But that's not the world you live in. The world you live in is one in which you have business goals. You have outcomes your business want to achieve. And the podcast that you're producing on a regular basis should support those goals, not the other way around. If you try, like so many others have, to focus in or to reverse that conversation and let's just get the podcast going and see what happens. I'm a fan of that. That's not a problem. I have no problem whatsoever with you picking up the microphone and talking and sharing it and seeing what happens. I'm a big experimenter. You know me. I like to follow the path of maximal interestingness. Another topic I discussed a few weeks ago. That's fine. But the goals of that are very different because you don't know what the goals are. You don't know what the outcomes are when you do things like that. And I do things like that all the time. And it's fine, but at some point, when you really want to get serious about things, and maybe you're there already, you need to look at, is this working? Is the time, is the energy, and the investment I'm putting into this podcast each and every week, is it working? Again, if you go back and look at how the podcast is doing, you're not really answering that question. Unless, of course, you're selling advertising and you can do a quick little number back and forth. But that's not the world you live in. There's no way you're making enough money yet. And if you are, I apologize. Congratulations, you are. But, realistically, people in your position right now, producing the kind of show you're producing right now, aren't going to be able to cover they might be able to cover their costs, but they certainly can't cover with time, energy, all of that factor all those in, those true opportunity costs. What are those? So I am challenging you today to flip the script, to go back to business school if you want. And I want you to think about, what are your business outcomes? What are the business outcomes that you are trying to achieve at your business where the podcast might help? I just jotted down a handful of notes here. And if you skipped business school or you fell asleep during this part, I apologize, but I got 15 years more of running businesses. So these things are kind of deeply ingrained into my head. And I know that you might hate this, but just bear with me for a moment here. Let me just run things off. Do you know what your retention rate is, or what a retention rate is? Right? That's your ability to actually keep a customer for a long time. Is your podcast designed to improve your retention rate? Maybe it's not, but is there an aspect that it could be? Would your customers listening to your podcast on a regular basis be more likely to stay customers because of your show? What about acquisition rate? Huge opportunity for podcasters right here. Podcasters just like you with a business. Would having a really well done podcast produced on a regular basis help you improve the acquisition rate, that rate which you acquire from prospects to becoming customers? What a horrible way to say that, but that's it. People are listeners, they're interested, and then they become a customer. What is your acquisition rate? And would a podcast improve that? Absolutely it can. It certainly has for me. Can a podcast help you lower costs for your business? Maybe. Especially if you're doing things like cranking out a bunch of explainer videos that cut you $6,000 to $12,000 at a time. Maybe going a podcast on a more regular basis could cut out some of the other things that you're publishing that aren't working quite as well. Or maybe you're paying to be on some business radio station, because you think that's working for you. Well, then you find out, those numbers are made up. And doing a podcast can cost you money. This can save you. A podcast can save you money. Are you increasing your revenue? Can you impact some sort of a culture change this for your podcast? Lots of business goals that you need to be thinking about. If you're already thinking about them, awesome. But if not, I really encourage you to sit down. Look, stop for 1 week. Do me a favor. Do me one big favor. Ignore your downloads for a week. Don't even look at them. Resist the temptation to log into Apple Podcasts Connect, stupid, and look at the number of devices and how much they listen to. Because the reality is those things probably aren't changing all that much. And more importantly, those are not business outcomes. Those are very tactical, immediate things that we call those outputs. That's an output, a tactical output that's very easy to track. It's simply a metric. But it doesn't tie back to important business goals. So I want you to, for 1 week, ignore those. Just flat out ignore them for a week. Don't even worry about it. And instead, the time when you feel that temptation to go check your stats, to go check and see what kind of numbers you pulled down, how many people are listening on Apple Podcasts, every time that happens, pull out your notepad and spend half an hour. Because that's how long you take, really. Honestly, when you start digging into things, take about a half an hour to start jotting down potential business goals that you have. And then, once those are all done, once you got a good, nice list of these are the business outcomes, these are the business objectives that I have, then you spend some time drawing a line to your podcast. How can my podcast improve these? And you'll find some won't, right? Maybe their podcast isn't going to help you lower costs anyway. Okay, fine, cross that off the list. That's not a business goal for you. You got to spend time figuring out what your business goals are and then how the actual podcast might be able to help. Business and podcasting, a sticky topic, but one I love to dig in, and I hope you like to dig into it as well. I need help with this because every business outcome, every business is different. Every business has different goals. You just can't, they're not all the same. I've given you some names, but I've given you no numbers. But if you need help finding a way to make sure that your podcast aligns to your business goals, get in touch because this is what I do. I support businesses, professional service providers, people like that who want to have a podcast. And I want to make sure that those podcasts that we help them produce achieve those business outcomes and goals. Check out Check out podcastlaunch.pro for a list of all the services that I offer to my clients. Reach out to me, evo@podcastlaunch.pro, and let's chat. All right. Thank you very much for watching. Have a fantastic week, and I shall be back tomorrow with yet another. No, not tomorrow. I'll be back on Monday with yet another podcast pontifications. Cheers.